1 minute. So, is that ready? Bonjour à tous. Welcome back. I'll just teach you one word from where I come. Normally we say karibu. Could you say karibu? Karibu. It means akobao. Welcome back. So for the next session, or let me start first by reintroducing myself. My name is Dennis Munuve. I do work as the Principal Investment Officer at CEFA, which is hosted and managed by the African Development Bank. For the next session, we have an exciting panel and moderator. So without much further ado, I'd like to invite Gabriel Pansberger, who's the Access to Finance Specialist at RAE, but also does up as the RAE lead at the African Development Bank. So over to you, Gabriel.
Okay, can you hear me well? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. It's a real pleasure. Do you hear me well? Okay, sorry. Yeah, so it's a real pleasure to welcome you here to this morning's session on a very exciting topic with an excellent panel here, a lot of woman power. So we are going to talk about the topic of how to catalyze more climate finance towards the decentralized renewable energy market to accelerate energy access and rural electrification. Let's just give me a very brief introduction to the topic, and then I will just really hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves and to, that we get straight into the topic. So I'm sure you have already heard a couple of times during this conference that there are still something about 760 million people lacking access to electricity and to energy globally, and of those, roughly 600 million people in Africa. So achieving the Sustainable Development Goal 7 by 2030 will require connecting roughly 100 million people per year globally, and of which again 90 million people in sub-Saharan Africa. So as we are not really on track with achieving this target, substantial efforts need to be undertaken to accelerate really energy access, and also to mobilize substantial capital flows into the energy access space to achieve those targets. So according to some studies, there are estimates that roughly $25 billion need to be invested annually to achieve universal energy access by 2030. So it's a huge sums of capital still needed to get somewhere close to these objectives and targets. So since the decentralized renewable energy sector plays a vital role really in accelerating energy access by providing clean energy solutions. They are in addition also supporting climate change mitigation and adaptation, and they're fostering climate resilience and promoting equitable and climate resilient socio-economic development in rural communities especially. So decentralized renewable energy actually has two sides of benefits. On the first hand, of course, access to electricity, but also tackling really climate change topics. So therefore, it's kind of, I think, a valid question: how can we unlock more climate finance to accelerate the development of the decentralized renewable energy market? So this is the topic we want to discuss and explore with our excellent panel this morning. And so I really want to start the session by introducing the panelists and basically to ask them already in their introductory note to talk a little bit about their experience with climate finance and what have been the challenges so far and lessons learned and best practices. So maybe I will start with the first panelist, with Vivek Pradhan. He's investment manager in the energy access team of British International Investment, so BII. BII is the UK's development finance institution and impact investor, and has set its target of roughly 30% of annual new commitments to be in climate finance. So that's kind of a very ambitious objective. So I would like to ask Vivek to present yourself, your organization, what you have done so far in climate finance, and maybe also touch a little bit on the question, what do you think, how can more climate finance be unlocked, and which type of financial instruments or de-risking tools are needed to mobilize more climate finance into the DRE sector? Over to you, Vivek.
Sounds good. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm from, after that introduction, I think that said it all in terms of development finance institution. Been around for 70 years. I think historically BII, and actually most of you will have known BII in its previous incarnation as CDC Group. We changed our name at some point last year to kind of So I think historically we've been very active in direct equity and fund investments, but over the last 10, 15 years have really started to ramp up our debt portfolio as well. Funds across the entire capital structure and really across almost all industries and sectors. In the infrastructure and climate vertical and access and efficiency, and I guess goes without saying that's mostly energy access focused, and essentially we're a team that's providing primarily debt products specifically to distributed, decentralized renewable energy companies. Historically, we started out funding mostly solar home system companies many years ago, probably 6-7 years ago, and now we're at the to solar home systems. We're trying to support the entire spectrum of energy access, so that includes mini-grid companies, and it also includes small-scale commercial industrial solar developers. And so I think we like to think of what we do as sitting somewhere between energy access on one hand and climate finance on the other hand. And climate finance is just an extremely broad topic at this point, but I guess we're focusing on DRE at this point. And so, I think we think of our investments in solar home systems and mini grids as being more towards energy access, and then some of the commercial industrial solar investments as being more towards the spectrum of climate. But I think ultimately we're trying to really draw a strong link where possible between investments in energy access and DRE, and do those investments in the context of climate finance. And so to that end, as Gabriela was saying, 50% climate finance on an annual basis, and distributed renewable energy, although it might ultimately be a small part of it just because the sector are quite small, it's still meant to be a pivotal part of that. So maybe I'll leave it there and hopefully.
Elaborate a little bit on what you think is still needed to unlock more climate finance into the energy access space.
Yeah, I mean.
Also in terms of instruments, maybe.
Sure. So I think, it's a good question to ask a DFI, because I think DFIs are, largely should be responsible and accountable for kind of crowding in investment into the sector, and to that end, we are trying to do that. But I think realistically, in terms of, I mean, if we're talking about climate finance in general, or even just the subsector of energy, we really need a spectrum of finance from DFIs. We need massive amounts of commercial investment, but I think we're all cognizant that, especially DRE over the last few years, not quite at the point that we thought it would be with respect to like immediate bankability from commercial investors, and so it really is incumbent upon the DFIs to or other types of finance where we can actually help to de-risk commercial investors and bring private money into the sector. So I think from our perspective, we're really keen on driving forward blended finance, and we have a number of initiatives to do that. Specifically, access companies is using a pool of Catalyst, and that's tended to take on a higher degree of risk than the other majority of our investments at BII. Reserve capital and hopefully not lose money, but then we also have a newer pool of capital called Kinetic, which is specifically meant to take on loss component, whether in individual investments or in funds. And so we're really hoping to deploy that more and more often in order to provide that level of comfort and first loss, whether in the form of a first loss investment or a guarantee or something like that, to bring in more private towards concessional capital, blended finance, all of those things. A sector that is still when it comes to solar systems. CNI, I think there's so much potential for even small-scale CNI, but it's not at the point where it's comfortable for commercial investors.
Thank you very much. That was quite informative indeed. So I would like now to turn to the private sector. So really happy to have two representatives of private DRE companies here to talk about their experience. So maybe let me start with Camille André Bataille. She's founder and CEO of Anka Madagascar, a kind of key player really in the DRE sector. You are developing, building and operating solar mini-grids for rural communities in Madagascar, but doing also C&I projects. So therefore also contributing a lot to also climate resilient economic development in rural areas. Can you present yourself, please, and what you're doing, and then share a little bit your experience with accessing climate finance? Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriele. Well, you said a lot of kind words. Thank you. I'm doing my best. I don't know if I'm a key player, but at least we're trying to do something. Good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be here. A little bit of background on Anka and what we do, as you mentioned, Gabriele. So we are involved in the energy access through two main jobs, two business units. So solar mini grids on one side and CNI on the other. So we've been doing that for the past 8 years. We have kind of a peculiar approach with regards to mini grids and energy access in isolated and fragile areas. We like to think energy not as an end, but as a mean, which means that we have developed a concept and an approach and a model that kind of builds sort of an ecosystem around energy access. So when we build mini grids, we try to break down silos and to build synergies between energy access, water supply and management, agribusinesses, e-cooking, mobility, and local governance. So we're really trying to use energy to build more resilient ecosystems in the areas where we are active. And when it comes to CNI, we've been involved in this industry for a few years now. I guess that's in the first place, like we come from the mini-grids sector originally. And we started in Madagascar. There were not a lot of people and a lot of companies involved in that sector like 18 years ago. So we're kind of the pioneers in the sector, and very quickly the private sector, private operators, the CNI companies, the B2B actually came to us because they were seeing what we were doing in the mini-grid space, and they were interested in getting access to the same kind of solution. So this is how we entered the CNI space. And we've been doing that, and basically the two business units feed themselves. We're learning a lot, both on the technological side and the business model side, and also on the financing side, obviously. Just to give you an idea, because we're very, very, very poor on communicating about what we do, so nobody actually knows about the track record or the achievements that we've done, and it's probably not very much, but still I think that it's worth to be mentioned, especially for a country like Madagascar, which is not often on the stage. So we've been developing actually more than 20 megawatts, and that's only in Madagascar, and we have commissioned more than 10 megawatts, and we also operate more than 2 megawatts, and we are constructing 3.5 megawatts that will be delivered in the next 2 years. And through that, coming a little bit more on the DRE, we operate mini-grids from a very wide range of capacities. We started obviously with very low-sized mini-grids. There were our laboratories, and we tested a lot of things where there are technology systems or models. But we now also operate mini-grids up to 600 kilowatt capacity and low voltage plus medium voltage sections for distribution. So I guess that's talking about that leads me to the question about climate finance, because obviously, and I'm pretty sure we're going to go to that point where we talk about scale and volume. But thanks to our large mini-grids, we partnered with an entity, a European entity that is providing sort of a hybrid financing instrument, which includes a debt mechanism to integrate within the blended finance system that we use for delivering mini-grids. And in counterpart, they actually access to our carbon credits, and they do monetize those carbon credits in Europe, which means that we actually do not go through the process of monetizing those credits ourselves. They're taking care of everything, and we hand over those credits to them, but in counterpart, we get access to very interesting concessional lending terms, which really supports the financing of the projects and the objective of coming up to a sustainable, profitable business model, but at the same time with relatively affordable tariffs to the population. So I guess that this is one way that we've been involved in the climate finance space. The other way is that, because obviously substituting, energy sources for producing electricity is not necessarily the best way to, avoid emissions and to get into the carbon finance space. We've been also working in electrical cooking, and the same partner supported us to develop this approach, this model, and to try to come up with, again, very incentivized and affordable tariffs for the population, because this is a little bit more trickier than just produce electricity and sell kilowatt hour to end customers. Cooking is very complicated, because what happens on the field, on the ground, in reality, is that when people get access to wood and charcoal for peanuts, how can they be incentivized to use electrical devices instead? So we've been trying to model and think that with our same financing partner to try to come up to solutions. And the whole thing has led to new discussion with new funding partners that wanted to aggregate and get into this space. And we're currently working with them to try to shape new kind of funding mechanisms that could integrate, at least partly, climate finance.
Thank you very much, Camille. That's actually quite interesting to see this quite innovative funding structure. So it's more or less like a carbon loan. So you get debt funding, but you're repaying with the carbon credits that you're generating from your project.
Yeah, I don't even know if there's a word for that.
Yeah, I
So
think
maybe
there's
we
a
can
word.
come up with a new wording.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess that it's some kind of a hybrid mechanism. But I'm not
Yeah.
an expert, so
Yeah.
I won't say.
Yeah, definitely very interesting, and it leads us actually to the next topic and the next panelist, because the environmental markets are a very important source, of course, of climate finance. So the environmental markets comprise of the renewable energy certificates, or in more generally the energy attribute certificates. And on the other hand, the carbon markets, of course. And now we have now here a specialist who will explain us all the difference between the energy attribute certificate market and the carbon market, and how IREX and DREX and PREX compare to carbon credits. So let me introduce NM Eia. She's the Regional Director for Africa at the IREX Standard Foundation. So it's really a pleasure having you here, because you will shed light on this really complicated but very exciting topic. So how can basically also companies and developers leverage and benefit from these environmental assets and through those access climate finance? So over to you.
Right, that's really loaded. Thank you so very much for having me. So I'm the Regional Director for Africa for the IREX Standard Foundation. Now the foundation is the code bearer for energy attribute certificates for electricity. Now what that means is that for every electricity that is generated, there is an environmental attribute to it. And you really cannot tell what the environmental attribute is, except it is certified. Now, this is an instrument that is tradable. And so what the IREX Standard Foundation does is that it's created a code that allows the certificate to be measured, quantified, and traded. And it's sold in, or the certificate is in 1 megawatt hour. So for every megawatt hour of electricity that is generated, the electricity is consumed by the population. If it's renewable, we're able to tell the source of that technology. So if it's hydro, if it's solar, if it's wind, whichever technology we're able to tell where the generation took place. And as a result of that, we're able to create a robust, credible system that allows that certificate to be traded with a digital ID, so that we avoid what you call double counting. Now, the IREX Standard Foundation has been in existence for at least 5 years. There are other REC schemes. So in the US, we have the Renewable Energy Certificate called RECs. And then in Europe, we have the Guarantees of Origin. But for the rest of the world, the IREX certificate is the issue of choice that is able to do issue IREX certificates. Now we are available. We work in 54 countries, where all those countries generate IREX certificates. In Africa, we are in 18 countries, and over the last 6 years, we've been able to issue 400 terawatt hours of certificates. So if you want to, imagine that we're looking at 400 trillion certificates that has been generated by the IREX certificate. Now, how does this interface with carbon markets? They're very different, in the sense that when you're looking at carbon markets, you're looking at ex ante. Ex ante is before the carbon is actually generated. So for project developer in the DRE market, you would design your project. So Anka would design her project, would engage a financier who might say, I want to be able to buy these forwards because they're going to be created in the next 10 years. And as a result of that, I'll buy that as a forward credit and pay for that today. That is going to be, there are a lot of risks with that, in the sense that, with a project failure, there's so many risks with that. And as a result of that, that is quantified in the price. that a carbon credit that Anchor would have generated. If Anchor had the finance to be able to create that instrument, that product herself, then she would de-risk the investment, and so she can get more for her carbon credit. But because Anchor is unable to do that, the funder who is bearing the risk would pay a smaller price for the carbon that is generated so that they are able to cover the cost of your loan. Now, what happens with a renewable energy certificate is that it's exposed in the sense that once electricity is generated, it is consumed. And once that consumption has taken place, we are able to evidence that in the certificates that is generated. So you're able to see the certificate is done, is dusted, and there's a price that you're able to negotiate bilaterally to agree what price you want to be able to sell it for. So in terms of how they differ, that's how it works there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I just have one follow-on question? So how can now project developers, project owners access the revenue? Because the important thing about these environmental credits is, that it's an additional revenue stream that enhances the profitability and bankability that is so important, for the financiers. So how can they access these certificates or carbon credits, whatever?
So how you're able to access an IREC certificate is that a country needs to become IREC issuing. And in terms of that, we deliberately work with governments and public and private sector operators, non-profits. The reason being that we want a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down imposition. So once we work with the governments to develop a country assessment report, that is approved by our board, and the country becomes IREC issuing. That is a free service, and there's no cost to that. Now, for people like Anchor, or developers like Anchor, who might want to have, who have devices that are less than 250 kilowatt, there is no price to pay for registering your devices on the IREC platform. There is a small price to pay if it is more than that, between 500 and 1,000 euros. Now, once a certificate is issued, there's a little price to pay, which is 0.25 euro cents. That is paid per certificate. And if it is issued, because there's a difference between you claiming the certificate and when the certificate is issued. And when it is issued to, or redeemed, by global corporates who need to demonstrate that they are taking direct action to reduce greenhouse gases in their portfolio, they buy these certificates. They would then pay a redemption fee of 6 cents. Now, just to add to that, we are looking for, particularly for the DRE market, because, if you look at traditionally what IREX has done, we've really focused on the grid market, in the sense that you're able to evidence very easily how much electricity has been generated on the grid and how much has been consumed on the grid. We need that third-party confirmation to be able to issue certificates. So it's been very easy to operate within the grid, the grid environment. We are approaching the DRE market because, particularly for countries or sub-Saharan African countries, developing emerging economies, that is a potential for growth, because there's a lot of high impact that is able to be achieved with that. And I think you asked a question about PREX, which is our peace-labeled REC. And they only focus, that's an issue that only focuses in countries that have had conflict. And so a PREC would typically attract a higher price than a standard IREC, because it has a peace label. And we are looking at DREX, which is really focused on the distributed renewable energy market. And they are just going to really aggregate certificates from the distributed renewable energy sector to issue RECs.
And the DRECs, they would also then count per kilowatt hour, right?
They would also count per megawatt hour.
Okay.
We're looking at a scenario where we can further break it down, but at the moment it is still 1 megawatt hour, and so there's a lot of aggregation that is going to be able to that is going to take place to allow that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that was already quite useful, and I can imagine there will be many questions later on regarding these attributes. So, but let me move now to our last panelist, also representative of the private sector. It's really a pleasure to welcome Laura Corcoran. She's the COO of AppTech Africa, one of the leading EPC companies for solar energy and water pumping, water irrigation systems across Africa. So with your solar solutions, you are really fostering access to clean energy and to clean water, also for domestic use, but also for productive uses, which then again helps a lot to first of all promote clearly the social and economic development, but also contribute to climate resilience. So very warm welcome. Laura, can you please introduce yourself and tell us whether you have already had experience with accessing climate finance, or are you planning to tap into the big pots of climate finance? Thank you.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me here today. So just to give a little bit of context of the perspective that I'm coming from. So AppTech Africa, it's an African-owned company. Our headquarters are in Uganda. We've been around for over 10 years, but we actually got our start in South Sudan, where we currently have an office. We are also in Central African Republic, Sierra Leone. We work in Liberia out of Sierra Leone. We work in DRC out of Uganda. So we really focus on frontier markets and on countries that have the lowest electrification rates. We do all kinds of applications, as mentioned. If someone wants solar on their house, we'll go and put a couple panels up, but we also do utility scale. We actually just commissioned a 14 megawatt project up in South Sudan. So there's a large range of what we're able to do. As far as climate finance, we have a project called Pay and Pump. This is in Uganda only, but it's a small-scale irrigation solution plus solar water pumping. It's designed for about 1 to 2 acres, and we do this solution as water as a service. So we provide the system to small-scale farmers. We provide the operation and maintenance of it, and then they pay for water as they use it. And through this, we've been able to partner with Carbon Clear, and we've been able to get a little bit of climate finance based on the carbon credit for that. So they've attached a price to that, and then we are reimbursed upon that. We've also been in talks with Energy Peace Partners about PREX for the project up in South Sudan, so that hasn't closed, but that's something that's in the pipeline. But as we're an EPC company, really, we pre-finance a lot of the renewable energy projects that we do. So we're constantly looking for project finance. We've been able to work with SEMA, the Energy Access Relief Fund, and Energize Africa. And as a company, we were always self-funded up until 2018. And so I was there from that time, and I really kind of helped our company put together and go through the teething process of accessing finance. And it was difficult. There was a lot of documentation involved. So I guess from our experience and working with other SME companies, especially in Uganda, a lot of times just having that documentation in place can be an obstacle for companies to access that funding. In addition, we've talked to probably 20 or 30 financing companies, and everybody has their niche. So there's a specific ticket size or tenure, or they're looking at productive use, or they're looking at utility scale. It's very difficult to find companies that are coming in and can give you the exact solution that you need. So there's a lot of shopping around. It takes time. In addition, when we look at a lot of the financiers out there, they're very keen on impact monitoring. So this is something that a lot of local African companies might not necessarily be doing. So this was something that we as a company also had to learn how to do, and to make sure that we're doing our monitoring based on whatever the parameters that our financiers were using. When I look at climate finance, what I see is a lot of the money is kind of located in the global north. And of all the money that's out there, I'm always curious to know what percentage of that is actually making its way down to Africa. 1. 2, I'm always interested to know of the money that's making its way to Africa, how much of that financing is going to companies that are owned by Africans locally. And then 3, out of that amount, how much money is available for African-owned companies operating in countries of conflict? Because we have a lot of renewable energy projects that we would like to be doing in the South Sudans and the Central African Republics, but what I've seen is that the risk appetite is not there for most investors. So that's a gap that we see, and we talk about the Alliance for Rural Electrification. We want to electrify all of these rural areas. But if that's the case, financiers really need to take a chance and provide climate financing for these countries so that we can also be providing those solutions there.
Thank you very much. I think that was very much to the point. Yeah, thank you very much for this contribution. And I think it's actually you raised very valid points. And for example, also Camille touched on it. So it's for example, ticket size, and there's this big pot of funding that is climate finance. But how, as you said, how does it really flow down to the projects in the countries? Somehow related also a little bit, always a bit the mismatch between what financiers, investors are looking for, what they can finance, what they want finance, but what the projects and what the companies on the ground really need. So that's a perfect question for Vivek, I think. Maybe you can a little bit, talk about what you think can be done to close this gap between the big funding that is around and what is really needed on the ground and by the companies. And can, for example, BII, can you be kind of this intermediary here to help channel the funding to the projects?
Oh, yeah, a lot to unpack there, but I think, yeah, these are all really good points. I think being channeled to companies operated by Africans, by local. That's a really good point, and I think, the entire sort of investor, world of investors and distributed renewable energy is definitely guilty to a certain extent of kind of, at least earlier on in the early years, particularly in the solar home system sector, of being, not intentionally, but in effect biased, I think, towards founders who were from Western countries and then ended up building and developing solar home system companies, for instance, in African countries. But I mean, I think we look at the amount of from private, more commercial impact funds, from commercial impact investors, and a lot of it has really gone towards to companies that are employing a lot of locals and at BII we're now after years keenly aware of this, and actually from an impact perspective, when we look at the potential impact that the companies were investing creating, one of the major criteria that we're using to contribute whether the companies we're investing in are locally owned. In terms of, I mean, the broader topic of climate finance being channeled to Africa, I think that's a really tough one because, climate finance in general, outside of DRE is very little left for Africa, which has, on one hand, there's the climate angle, on the other hand, there's the energy access angle, where there's an obvious need for access to electrified areas or better electricity in unelectrified areas, and so DRE is even a much smaller segment of that. And I think for us, it's a tough sector to invest in time because if you look at the sectors that we're investing into, so started with solar home systems, now we're looking at mini grids. The commercial industrial solar, I don't mean sort of commercial industrial, I mean really smaller scale CNI, not really utility scale or the type of developers that scale CNI that is having these primarily all businesses as their off takers, and I think we've been thinking for several years that the sort of medium lower than we expected, but we are at that point where now I think in 2022. But nevertheless, SHS, mini grids, small scale CNI, these are businesses that are high, where we have the ability to make concessional funding. Still, nevertheless, public money that we're using. So it's just all that to say, it's just a really tough sector to invest in, and therefore.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think that was very good. I don't know if Camille, you want to add any specific challenges you see that needs to be tackled? One aspect I also wanted to highlight a little bit that you also, Laura, mentioned is this. I think also this data collection, data measurement, monitoring, reporting. I think this can be quite a load. Yes. So especially if you want to access carbon credits or RECs or so maybe I go first to Anna. Maybe you want to comment on this a little bit. So in the meantime, you can think about other challenges.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that.
Yes. No, I mean, it's really, what are really kind of the requirements in terms of data collection, measurements, reporting, etc.?
In terms of data collection, like I said, with IREX, what you need to be able to do is evidence that the electricity that you've generated has been consumed. So you can have, for instance, a 3 megawatt device or power plant, but the fact that you have a 3 megawatt device installed doesn't mean that you're actually generating 3 megawatts. So what we are interested in is the evidence that shows that you've generated 3 megawatts. And once you show that evidence, backed by a third party, we are able to support that with certificates. What we are really looking forward to with the DREX is create a system where that is a seamless process, and that's happening with PREX already. So with the new technologies, you're able to immediately see the consumption data, whereas with a grid, that information would go to a large state third party that we are able to also collect the data because it's publicly available, and we're able to collect that data and we're able to issue the certificate. So with the distributed renewable energy sector, Now there's technology that allows that to happen in a way that's seamless, in a way that enables that to be able to provide that credible, robust certificate. And for those who perhaps may have been in the carbon market for, or in the carbon finance industry, since the Kyoto Protocol era, you know how credibility is critical to this market. And without credibility, there isn't any market. And so being able to demonstrate that is very crucial. I mean, I just really want to pick on the point on DFIs and, and whether they really understand the African context. And I raised this question yesterday, and I think that we need to be able to come to a place where we really recognize the markets that we're working in. And to really recognize as well the opportunity that is there, because you're looking really at a blank space. And if you want to go back into history, you're looking perhaps 300 years ago, 400, 500 years ago, when the first ship sailed out of England looking for India. And it's really typically like that. And they chanced upon it, brought back cotton. And then in the Midlands, you see all these industrial processes, industrial factories taken off. That is what is happening in Africa today, in 2023. But there isn't finance to be able to make that happen. Being able to be a real catalyst, understanding what the context is, and providing instruments that work with that context and not against it, is really critical for us to be able to really unlock all the climate finance, all the RECs, etc. Because if you look at RECs, IREX, for instance, you're looking at companies who report to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. They're reporting on their Scope 3 emissions to say that they are, in their operations, they're reducing emissions. They're also beginning to look at their supply chains. If you look at Africa, there's a lot of mining that goes on here. They feed into a supply chain. How are we able to really evidence that the supply chains that exist in Africa are also decarbonizing? And then compare that to the fact that African countries are expected to decarbonize by 2070, according to the Paris Agreement. And yet we are reaching 1.5C even before 2030. So there's a huge disconnect that is underway. But that disconnect is not connecting to the solutions that need to be able to take place on the continent, to obviously provide energy access, do the energy transition, etc., and to support things like CBAM in Europe, where there's a carbon border adjustment mechanism, going to require companies who are supplying to Europe, for instance, to measure the carbon that is in whatever exports that they've sent abroad. So there's a huge disconnect, and I'm not sure that the BFIs, sorry, Vivek, are able to really capitalize on that. So yes, I've strayed a bit, but I suppose that the question is, how do we really bring it all together with the climate finance? Because that is there, you know, it is there. How do we really bring it all together? Sorry, I'm doing your job, but sorry.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, Vivek, if you want to revert on that.
I think it was supposed to go to Camille, but...
And you also go first. Do you want to go first?
We also want to also give the opportunity, of course, to the audience. I was already told from Ines. We could, unless, Camille, you want to add something? And then,
yes.
And then we open the floor to the audience.
Well, maybe first I think that I need to declare my love to Ena, because I just couldn't agree more with that has just been said. And I love this kind of conversation where we actually, you know, be honest with each other, and we acknowledge that we need this kind of conversation. Yesterday I was in another panel, and we were talking about mobilizing domestic capital and decreasing forex risks, for instance. And I think that is all related. And the same answer from the DFIs actually, you know, came up, that it's just all about risks, and that it's very complicated, and that the market is not ready, and that they can't fulfill all the requirements, and so on. And even though I do understand, even though I do feel, because we're all on the same boat, I just think that this is no longer an answer that we can provide to this kind of discussion. This is 2023, and we've been having the same discussion for the past years. And it's just, a little bit frustrating not to find a solution to get to sort of a compromise or an agreement or an understanding to what needs to be done if we want to move forward and move faster, because we are way behind schedule with regards to what we need to achieve. And in the end, I think that we also need to not to forget that they're beneficiaries and customers at the end of this. Like, this is the reality. And I don't know about Vivek, I don't know about Enam, but and I don't know about many people, but I know for sure that for the more than 100 people working in the investment world that I've been talking to for the past years, probably less than 20% have actually stepped a foot in the countries and on the field and know what we are dealing with on a daily basis. So going back to the question about the challenges and so on, I think that Enam raised a very fair point. The main challenge is probably the lack of understanding. It all comes from that, I think. Because if we did understand each other, we would be able to come up with fair instruments and processes and expectations with regard to what kind of return we do expect. And we're all talking about financial return. But it's not the only returns that we should be looking at. We should be looking at environmental and social returns as well. And this is part of our job. This is part of DRE. We're not just doing that because we want profitable businesses. We want to prove that this can be profitable while delivering services and impact to population that are in the needs. And this is part of global objectives. So, yeah, I guess that we need to understand each other. We need to, step towards one another to try to find compromise solutions. Obviously, time is also a very key aspect. I think that we're lacking time now. So we shouldn't be wasting any more time. So every time a process is very cumbersome and very time-consuming, very complicated, this is not only, I think, counterproductive for the process that we're going through, but this might also prevent even private sectors to even go there and investigate those opportunities. We're talking about catalyzing climate finance, but is this, attractive enough for the private sector? For instance, I can only talk from where I stand, which is private sector, and I don't know exactly what you're dealing with, but from my perspective, this needs to be more attractive and more simple to be understood and processed. I guess that this would be the main comments. Maybe just one other is actually governments. There's no government representative on this panel, and I think that when we discuss, for instance, the double counting and the endorsement from governments to actually partner or jump in these mechanisms, and I've experienced that in Madagascar, we need also government to join the table and agree on moving forward in that path. But sometimes it only comes to one signature on one page letter, and if you don't get that, there is no climate finance opportunities for the country. Simple as that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. You want?
I'll just say a little bit. I think those are all really very, very true points, and so I don't want to necessarily mount a defense on behalf of DFIs here, but I will try a little bit as well. A couple of things. I mean, I think your point about context in African countries is very well noted, and is a problem with a lot of investors. I wouldn't say with DFIs necessarily, because I mean I really do think that at least we have a full understanding of the context in but I mean we really do possible and what the problems are and solutions. Now, I think it is tough because it's, especially with energy access, it's still not a trivial matter to be investing into unprofitable companies. That's Now most DFIs do have certain pools. All right, we've been doing that for a while, for at least 7-8 years in terms of the solar home system sector, for profitable or still unprofitable today, and there might be a pathway to profitability, but it's long and hard, and it's an extremely difficult proposition for the people running these. The home system industry is a really good example of where there's a need for more equity, but there's also a need for, I think, admission. Are striving for profitability and sustainability. The reality of energy around the world in most countries is that there's some level of subsidization or concessionality that's required to be able to provide energy even under positive distributed renewable energy. It's all the more realize that perhaps full profitability and sustainability is important, but that doesn't something on the kind of onerous process of
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really sorry, but we need also to give the opportunity to the audience to ask questions. And so, because we have only something like 10 minutes left, so I would like to. So, is there a microphone going to the or? Yes, there's the lady.
Hi, my name is Edwin Obiru. I'm with Bridge Connection Global. And, well, that complicates things. Counting, if we are looking at to harmonize that with carbon credit.
Hello. All right. Okay. So we are not harmonizing DREX, PREX, and IREX. IREC is the standard. So we create the standard for attribute certificates, energy attribute certificates. Now, DREX and PREX ride on that system. So rather than, so an IREC, in definition is an international renewable energy certificate. A PREC is a peace label. It's got a peace label. And the peace label is only because it works in countries or issues IRECs in countries that have been affected by conflict. So we are looking at the South Sudan, Somalia, Liberia, Syria, well, not Liberia and Syria, but those are the countries that it aims to be able to issue credits from. DREX, on the other hand, are for distributed systems, so distributed renewable energy systems. How do you avoid double counting? There isn't really any double counting with IREX. There's a double counting where you have perhaps a company that has bought an IREC, a carbon credit from somewhere, and the government is also issuing the same carbon credit. And we're beginning to see those in Africa. But that doesn't happen within the IREC system because it's exposed, it's fact-based, and we don't have, well, that's not possible. Does that answer your question? Or we can have a conversation later. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And any other questions? So we have one this gentleman.
Et dans plusieurs pays africains.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur. Donc, Vivek, you want to? Okay.
Okay, so I'm a bit embarrassed to use the translator because I've lived in a French-speaking country for in English anyways. So I'm not entirely sure I understood the first part of your question with regards to, I guess, context, was it, of the local context? And so at this risk of repeating myself from what I said earlier, I'll just reiterate that in general, and I think, that includes BII, perhaps not had enough of a from what I see from my other DFI a lot, and I think it for us in the local offices who are part of the investment committees and on whether or not this actually makes sense given their understanding of the local context. And so it is a hugely important context for us.
Okay, so no, we don't. Cameroon is not yet an IREC issuing country. Would love for that to happen. So if you're able to, if there's a Cameroonian government representative here, I'd like to engage with them. And if there's a local non-profit corporate, I would really like to engage with them. The other thing is that in the past, we were looking at how we can include off-grid systems or distributed renewable energy systems. We are able to do that now with DREs. So that's a solution for you. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe one, I am looking to Ines. Maybe one very last question, this gentleman in the second row.
Just a little bit about
The end of the question.
so you start to talk about how the challenges that can be faced.
Yeah, on this specific example that I mentioned, it's actually not my company being involved specifically in that process. I'm just kind of telling what I've been exposed to, because as a private sector, we're doing our job, but we're also trying to support the overall sector to thrive and to move forward. So we're working not only with financiers, DFIs, but we're also working with public institutions and governments. So we try to facilitate, and we've had several times we've been involved in a conversation and a work session and endorsement session with government representatives, and it's most of the time been quite complicated and very long processes, only for getting some signatures. The example that I was mentioning is actually referring to a high-level conversation between the government and finance institutions and climate funds that want to partner with the government, and they do need in their process sort of a non-objection letter to be signed so that they can enter this process. And I'm really not an expert with regards to those processes. But what I understand from all the discussion that we've had is that without this very simple letter, for instance, and it's just an example again of all the changes that we can go through, nothing can happen. This is kind of the first step, and I'm pretty sure Enam can confirm that. But this is a first step that just shows that governments are willing to go that way and to let enter those funds to work on those in those territories, and we need that also to avoid the double counting. So not being able to provide that actually prevents the whole funding system to actually happen in the country, which then for private sectors, like in the end, prevents the private sector to get access to those funding. So this is a bummer. This is a huge bummer. And to be honest, I think that I don't want to be too much controversial in this conversation, but these are complicated political games as well. So it is complicated, and I think that we're just touching some of the very sensitive subjects related to climate finance as an overall mechanism.
Just to add to that, so in the climate finance process, there are two distinct processes. There's one for the compliance market, and there's one for the voluntary market. Now, the compliance market has traditionally been complicated. And we are looking at, in the past, under the Kyoto Protocol, the CDM, the Clean Development Mechanism process, where you need, I'd say, your dog's grandmother's name and, the relations and everything for you to be able to go through a hoop. Now, where the government does not clearly understand the commercial aspect of it. And I've seen a lot of times that a lot of our governments are not very commercially aware. There's very little business acumen. Whereas if you compare that to Asia, you look at China, India, they're very business aware. And so they're able to leverage the opportunities that climate finance brought. So you go to China, it's awash with green projects. You come to Africa, it is the reverse. And yet this is where it's needed the most. So where a government can stampede a process is, for instance, in the process in additionality. So I'll give you a typical example where a government makes a huge announcement that I am going to fund solar home systems in my budget. Immediately a government makes that announcement, what it removes is the financial additionality that a project developer like Anchor can then go forward to seek climate finance because it's no longer additional. The government can fund it. But for a climate project, a climate finance project to be able to go forward, it has to be additional legally and in terms of policy, it has to be additional. But by making announcements because of a lack of a commercial awareness, they really stampede that effort. And then you come to the bureaucracy of having to seek a letter of no objection, which just says, I don't object to this project taking place in my country. I support it. I welcome it. I provide all the, incentives for that to happen. And yet you perhaps need to pay people, or I'm not saying you, but you might have to do that, rub people's back, cushion people, sweet talk people, and that's not necessary. Because it should be just a simple process. You go to the office, the DNA, which is the designated national authority, you go there, you seek an appointment, you're given an appointment, you deliver your message, and that's it. But it doesn't quite happen. And as a result of that, we just really limit ourselves and hold ourselves back. I hope I answered that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's time to wrap up. So I would really like to thank everyone, the panelists. It was a very lively discussion. Thank you so much. I think we can also continue the discussion during the coffee break. Okay. That was obvious.
That was ESCOM.
Okay, no, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be on this panel. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much, Camille, Enam, Vivian, and Laura, I think, and Gabrielle, that's a fantastic job. I'll be definitely following up with Enam on the carbon credit markets. I would advise you to engage with each of the panelists during the breaks. So next on the agenda, we have critical industry announcement. And on that regard, I would like to invite Schneider Electric to come to the floor. Thank you. Schneider Electric. As we wait for Schneider Electric, maybe I'll just leverage to have this opportunity to maybe give a highlight of the next sessions in the afternoon. We'll be having three different sessions. The first session will be the thematic session on innovative finance to scale up decentralized renewable investments. That will be happening here at the main ballroom. The other thematic session will be on investing in the future, looking at job creations and skills development, and that will be happening in the Negela room. And thirdly, we have a Get Invest matchmaking that also will be happening in the next room, in the next door. I don't know whether I still have Schneider. Please confirm. Yes. We seek your indulgence. Schneider is coming in some few seconds. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Alors la première chose que je voudrais faire là maintenant, c'est vous présenter toutes mes excuses parce qu'on a eu une petite incompréhension avec l'organisation. Et en fait, cette annonce a été faite hier, mais je vais bien sûr vous la répéter. Le seul point, c'est que malheureusement, les partenaires avec qui je devrais être ne sont pas là, et je vous prie de nous excuser de ce petit souci. Alors, ce dont je voulais vous parler aujourd'hui, c'est du financement de l'accès à l'électricité. DRE électrique, dans le cadre de son programme de RSE, de responsabilité sociale et environnementale, a développé toute une série de soutiens à l'accès à l'électricité par la création et la participation à des fonds d'investissement à impact dédiés à l'accès à l'électricité, à l'efficacité énergétique, à l'énergie productive. Et donc, on a créé un premier véhicule en 2009. On a initié avec la DFI anglaise, qui s'appelle aujourd'hui BII et qui à l'époque s'appelait CDC, la création d'un fonds qui s'appelle Energy Access Venture en 2015. avec une équipe basée à Nairobi. On a également créé un fonds dédié à l'accès à l'électricité en Asie du Sud et du Sud-Est. Et aujourd'hui, j'ai le grand plaisir de vous annoncer qu'on vient de nouer un partenariat avec la société Gaia Impact pour créer un nouveau fonds dédié à l'accès à l'électricité, l'efficacité énergétique et l'énergie productive, très majoritairement en Afrique. Ce fonds vise à closer à hauteur de 80 millions. Nous ferons un premier closing à hauteur de 40 millions. Et ce partenariat repose à la fois sur les compétences d'investisseurs à impact de la société Gaia, pour qui ce sera le deuxième fonds, la connaissance de l'Afrique et notamment de tout l'écosystème des PME africaines d'un fonds d'investissement français qui s'appelle Investisseurs et Partenaires et qui a des implantations locales un peu partout en Afrique, y compris ici à Abidjan, et Madame Koumba aurait dû être à mes côtés, et la capacité de financement et l'assistance technique que peut apporter une société comme Schneider Electric. On vise avec ce fonds de toucher et de permettre à plus de 4 millions de personnes d'avoir accès à l'électricité et également de créer au minimum 20 000 emplois pour les gens qui vont travailler dans les sociétés dans lesquelles on va investir. Bien entendu, également, ce sera essentiellement de l'énergie renouvelable et donc on va avoir un effet carbone. Voilà ce dont je voulais vous parler aujourd'hui. Et si vous avez des questions, je suis à votre disposition.
Merci à tous. Je crois que maintenant, on peut avancer à la pause déjeuner. Donc, let's be back here at 2 p.m. to advance to the next sessions. Just to recap, we have 3 thematic sessions that are happening in the afternoon. Firstly, on innovative financing to scale up decentralized renewable energy investment. That will be happening here at the main ballroom. The other session is on investing in the future, focusing on job creations and skills development, and that will happen in Dengele room. And we have a Get Invest matchmaking session in the room next door. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for your participation, and let's be here at 2 p.m. after your lunch. Merci à tous.